Hi, my name is Kipton Courier. Welcome to the world of beauty and magic. Sometimes we meet people out and about outside of my office, and sometimes we review their books or look at pieces of art and we meet them in my office. And so I'm so happy today. I discovered someone new and interesting, and I can't wait for you to meet them. And her name is Marjorie Merriweather Post. You may have heard from her. She was the richest woman in America for a very long time. And today, we're talking about the evolution of Marjorie Merriweather Post's style through houses and husbands. She had lots of houses and lots of husbands, and I can't wait for you to meet her. She was a really interesting, quirky, authentically herself kind of person. And so let's get down to it. I recently read American Empress by Nancy Rubin, and it got me thinking a lot about Marjorie Merriweather Post. It was a really beautifully written biography. And I also visited Marjorie's last house, which was Hillwood, and that's in Washington, D.C. And there were some confusing things about the house. And once I read, once I read the biography, I understood them. The fascination with Russian art was really one that was very curious, but we will find out in this book, and I'll be able to share with you why she was fascinated with Russian houses. And so I'd like to actually let me give a little bit of background because we're going to jump into her houses and her beautiful things, and I think it's important to understand where she came from. So her father was C.W. Post, and he was just a very interesting person. And I think what's really interesting about him is he was an unsuccessful business person and really unwell for a long time in his life. And when he was unwell, he kept going to places for cures, and he ended up at the Kellogg Institute, and it was a sanatorium at the time. And, he spoke of a lot of digestive issues. And I think, to me, it sounds like, IBS or, think it could be something like that. I'm not a doctor. Um, and so he started eating cereals and started really thinking about food. And he created Postum and this Postum cereal later in life. And he basically built General Foods in 20 years. And he was not very wealthy the majority of his life. He came into wealth very later and rapidly, to grow from kind of nothing into one of the richest people in the United States within 20 years is remarkable. And you know, he was different. He was very different, and he raised his daughter in this different kind of way. She was an only child. Her parents were unhappily married and divorced at a certain point. And then he married her nanny, who wasn't that much older than her, controversial. But she was always a daddy's girl, and he groomed her for business in a time where she wasn't even allowed to really be in board meetings, even when her father passed away when she was 27 years old and was, one of the richest women in America. And so she would use her husband and other people to be her voice in meetings. And it's an interesting way that she led the Postum cereal company to become General Foods from like the back seat. She wasn't she wasn't on the board. She didn't, she wasn't the chairperson. She wasn't the CEO, but she really gave them the direction and was a brilliant businesswoman. And when you read her, if you read her book, one of her daughters actually says if she were born in a different time, she would have been a very successful CEO or an executive. And so what she was an executive of was shopping in her houses, which I'm here for it. I really appreciate the decorative arts and design. And so let me introduce you to Marjorie Merriweather Post. We're going to start off. This is a portrait of her done in 1930. I believe she may have been in her first marriage at that time, but we'll get to that in a second. And she spent a lot of, and I call it her serial money, post serial. She spent a lot of her serial money on jewelry, on houses, on art, on antiques. And she was not shy about it. And she wasn't shy about wearing things either. I mean, she really went for it. And I really like this too. So Marjorie Post's interest in strong female figures and artists is another motif that emerges from a close look at Hillwood's collection. She clearly admired Catherine the Great, Marie Antoinette, and other members of French and Russian royalty, collecting their images and portraits, gem and jewelry, and miniatures. She also acquired objects believed to have been owned by them, including furniture and porcelain, as well as personal accessories. In an artful touch, she commissioned portraits of herself and her daughters that she then juxtaposed with historical pieces in the various rooms of her house. And I should mention, this is the houses and collections of Marjorie Merriweather Post, The Joy of It. And the joy is apparent, and it's just a really beautiful book, and it's by Wilfred Zisler. And so, Wilfred, you did a beautiful job on this book, and it's my pleasure to review it today. And so this is another portrait of Marjorie, and this was in the Tregarin house, which I think with her third husband, she left her third husband in this house, and then she moved to Hillwood. And so we talk a little bit about early days. And so C.W. Post, he lived from 1854 to 1914. Marjorie Post's father began preparing his only child early on to one day take over the family business he founded, a small cereal company that would grow into the lucrative General Foods Corporation. In C.W.'s worldview, intelligently managing money and wealth was key. He relied on it, collecting art and objects as well as conducting business. Marjorie took her father's lessons to heart, as demonstrated in a 1923 letter to the dealer Sir Joseph Devine about a commode that he had proposed she acquire. A commode is like a big dresser. The picture of the commode has arrived. It is very attractive, and I might be interested, but I notice you have omitted giving any price. And of course, you know, that has a large bearing on any of my decisions. May I hear from you, please? Marjorie was value driven, and she was not frivolous with her money. She was actually a very astute investor. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we start talking about her houses and the constructions of her houses. And so I wanted to point out this, I just thought this painting was really beautiful that she owned. And it was from a French female artist, circa 1790, excuse me. And so L'Enfant Chéri by Marguerite Girard is just a really beautiful piece. And so I love that while she understood Ms. Post, she understood that she couldn't fully operate in the world as a man, but she noticed that there were a lot of female artists and successful women in the arts, and she supported them in the best way that she could. So she was born in Illinois, and she had childhood homes in Illinois, Texas, and Michigan. Again, her husband had, not her husband, well, was that like some sort of, not a Freudian slip, because I think Freudian's with the mom. That was some sort of slip, because they always say she was trying to marry her dad in a lot of ways. And none of the men that she married could live up to him. And so, you know, her father was not very successful. He really, he got into Christian Science and positive thinking, and that really did change a lot in his life. I love this room. So this is Marjorie Post's bedroom in the early 20th century. So I think this is when, you know, she was a young girl. And it's really, today you would look at this bedroom and it's the bedroom of any, you know, tween or teen. And it doesn't look like anything special. This is extravagant. This is an extravagant bedroom for a young girl to have. It's highly decorated. A lot of money and resources were spent on this room. It's not typical. This is highly unusual. She was sent to Washington, D.C. for a finishing school. It was called the Mount Vernon Seminary. Now it's affiliated with George Washington University. So she kind of bopped all over, and she went on a lot of trips to Europe with her dad. And he exposed her to the arts. And I think that's where she picked up. She really was fascinated with royalty and courts and kings and queens. And now I love this story about this house. So she met this guy, Edward Bennett Close. And it's actually Glenn Close's grandfather from his second marriage, not to Miss Post. And so Marjorie, I don't think her dad necessarily approved of her first husband, and he wanted to, you know, teach her the value of money and how to manage a house with a lot of, how to manage a house. And so she constructed this house. She was almost like the general contractor in a way and reported back to her dad. She would have to report back budgets. One time, I think her budget was off by 10 cent, and her dad sent it back to her and had her do it again. He was almost training her to be in finance. Um, and so she married Edward Bennett Close. She had two daughters with him, but quickly realized she had married a frat bro who went out drinking with his friends a lot. And she didn't like it. She didn't like the Connecticut housewife life. It wasn't for her. And if you think about it, there really weren't any role models for her at the time. No one had great wealth at that time, and for her to have all this money and but didn't really fully have independence to move and be in the world. She couldn't vote. Women were expected to be married, and I think that's why she got married a lot, because she knew that was she couldn't get over that. Here's a room. So there's the main bedroom in the boulders. The boulders did burn down. They had gone out one night and they came back, and the firefighters were in there and they were throwing artwork out of out of the windows. And I think it was an indicator, and maybe a good kind of, I don't know, what do you call that? Not an example, but an indication of the status of her marriage, potentially, that the house was on fire. This is a really beautiful painting. This is the Love Letter. It's a French painting who was active in Italy circa 1900, and it was from Frederic Selacroix. She had really beautiful taste. So there's a mansion in New York. She did not like the Connecticut housewife life. And her father died, I believe, in 1927. And so she needed a presence in New York to be closer to the operations, not the factories, but I guess the business operations of what would become General Foods Corporation. And I believe she did involve her first husband, but he didn't really take to the business. It was a little out of his league. And so they rented a mansion there and they really liked it, and they ended up purchasing it. But time started changing, and there was, there were all these big mansions in New York, and then it became more and more about apartment living. So at a certain point, someone proposed, we'd like to buy your mansion, and we're going to build an apartment building here, and you can have whatever you want. And so she she took a triplex, and this is at Fifth Avenue and 92nd Street. She had the top three floors, and she had whatever she wanted. She built, it was grand. It was a huge triplex for entertaining. She moved a beloved aunt in. She had her own space, and she loved it. And she was only there part-time because she started realizing she wanted to move about and be around. But here is, I mean, it's just miraculous. They built this not a lot of time. To build a building like that, it's just stunning. And so very French inspired. She started working with antique dealers during this time, and was buying and selling a lot. She was obsessed with Marie Antoinette, which I think is amazing. She had this miniature portrait commissioned. It's watercolor on ivory. She looks gorgeous. It's a lot of fun. She would dress up. I think later in the book we have a picture of her dressed up as Marie Antoinette as well. She let go of the first husband and she moved on to E.F. Hutton, who I think was really the best suited partner for her. And she was married to these men, not short amounts of time, not like a year or two. A few of them she was married to for decades. And so she had one daughter with E.F. Hutton. So E.F. Hutton owned a stock brokerage firm, did very well, was very financially successful, business astute, and they entertained a lot. And so they built, they actually didn't build, I think they remodeled. This is Hillwood in Long Island. And she really created kind of a English fantasy land in the way that Marie Antoinette had her little village outside of Versailles. She did this in a lot of ways with Hillwood. And the Hillwood name she reused, obviously, for the Washington, D.C. house. She had a golf course, lots of horses, and unfortunately, E.F. Hutton had a son who, when he was with Ms. Post, died in a horse accident, which is why she really wanted to have another child for him. He was an only child. And so, oh, and this is really beautiful. I guess this is one of their bedrooms. Let me see if it says. Yeah, an Adam style bedroom at Hillwood Estate. So this is actually, I think this is the Hillwood in DC. This is not the Hillwood on Long Island, but still beautiful nonetheless. She also, so she had, the triplex in New York City. She had the Hillwood Estate in Long Island. And so that was for closer trips and entertaining friends. But she really wanted a more of a rustic retreat. And so she had a 207-acre camp in the Adirondacks. And her camp, it was built by Munsell, a local designer, in collaboration with the New York architect Theodore Blake. Camp Torridge, as completely reimagined by Marjorie Post, had 11 guest houses, a tennis court, and staff accommodations. And I don't see it in here, but I think she had like 80 staff. It was a really wild number. She had a lot of employees. She managed a lot. That's why I think her daughters think she would have been a great CEO. She loved managing a lot of things at different times, and she just did it domestically. I also like that in this picture, you can see the taxidermy. Gosh, that's probably real animal fur on those leopard chairs. And she just had a really quirky, fun style, and all of her houses were different. And you can see her style evolve over time and becomes really refined when you get to her final house. Here's the picture, as promised, of Marjorie Post as Marie Antoinette. She was outside her gacito, and so that was her first house in Palm Beach. And so Palm Beach, Florida, I think Mr. Flagler, the Flagler Museum you can go visit in Palm Beach is another house museum, really saw potential in Florida before anyone else did. It was, swampland. It wasn't really developed. And when we move into the age of abundance and people start having all this money, they start looking for leisure opportunities. And they go to Florida. It was new. They got away from the harsh winters, and then people started having multiple houses. And so she built one house with E.F. Hutton, and as soon as she built it and moved in, she decided it wasn't big and grand enough. And so then she, you may have heard this before, she built Mar-a-Lago. And so this was a multi-year build, and in another one of our episodes, we talk about designing Camelot and how Jackie Kennedy really redecorated or redesigned the White House in a collaborative effort and with the teamwork. And when Ms. Post started building Mar-a-Lago, she was building it with her second husband, E.F. Hutton, and decided that she wanted to mix it up a little bit. So she had an architect. She brought in a different architect and made them work together. And you got a real hodgepodge of style. It's almost like she was inventing Florida style in a lot of ways. Also, something really interesting about Mar-a-Lago is when she was doing her estate planning, she really wanted this house to be a winter retreat for presidents. And so she actually donated Mar-a-Lago to the United States government when she passed away. And I believe she passed away in the 70s. And it was too expensive for the US government to maintain. And so they sold it to Donald Trump. It's fascinating how these things come to be. Now we're moving into the Washington, D.C. years. And so, unfortunately, E.F. Hutton was having a little too much fun and had extracurricular activities that didn't align with Mrs. Post's vision for marriage. And so she decided to part ways. And we kind of skipped over, there was a yacht that they built together. I think it was the largest yacht at the time in the whole entire world. And so she started turning her attention more towards Washington, D.C. And this is where she met and married Joseph Davies. And she became a diplomat's wife. She's had all these, the evolution of style through houses and husbands is really the perfect title for this episode. So she moved into Foxhall, which they don't really talk a lot about. And then she moved in Tregaron, I think I'm saying that correctly, with her third husband, Mr. Davies, who became ambassador to Russia. And so in Treguerin, they spent a little bit of time. I'm jumping forward in a lot of ways because we're moving through a lot of houses pretty quick. But when she decided to separate from Mr. Davies, she she then moved on to Hillwood, and that was really the house that she did for herself and by herself. And here we are, and this is her bedroom at Hillwood, and you can see how her evolution is heavily French influenced. I mean, why is French stuff the best stuff? I don't know. Um, it's the appreciation of beauty, maybe, that's in their culture. I have no idea, but I'm so attracted to it. And I understand why the wealthiest woman in America would want a heavily French bedroom. I get it. I get it, Marjorie. Here again, she loved portraits done. This was her daughter, Eleanor Close, with her first husband. And then here's another portrait of Ms. Post. Now, we've gotten through the houses, and somehow I think we did miss the sea cloud. But if you have a chance, Google sea cloud and take a look at her yacht, because she spent a lot. Her yacht was like another house for her. And if you like this video and you like following along and learning about beautiful things, I would love it if you like the video, if you made a comment, or you subscribe to go along on this journey with us, because I'd like to keep doing these. I think they're a lot of fun. I love YouTube as a format for learning, and I really like spending time with you. You're a YouTube friend now. And so now we're moving more into the collection. So while she donated Mar-a-Lago to the US government, she really wanted to donate her Hillwood Estate to the Smithsonian, which is also, technically a government institution, I believe. And so when she moved into Hillwood, I don't know where in the process, I'm sure she was inspired by Mr. DuPont of Winterthur and his creation of Winterthur as a museum. And so she really did want to donate her house. She wanted it to become a museum. She had all of this Russian art. And so she made a stipulation in the agreement to the Smithsonian that they could never serve food or drinks inside of Hillwood. And evidently it was a non-starter for the Smithsonian, and they backed out. And so she had also created a foundation, and now the Hillwood Foundation actually operates this museum, and it's a private foundation. And so this is in the entryway. This is one of my favorite busts when you walk in. It's so stunning. She has this really big grand staircase. And again, when she was renovating Hillwood, she knew that, I think at that time, that she was moving towards more of a house museum. And I mean, they don't even picture all of the houses. I'm not all the houses, all the rooms in here. I mean, it's, beautiful, beautiful French. It's all French. It's, gilded, it's gold. It's, she had the best of the best. She literally had the best. And she would have square dances. And so she was a hostess, and she would host huge dinner parties. She was a big hostess. She would host dances, she would host balls, she would host parties, and she loved getting dressed up. She loved putting on all of her jewelry. She was eccentric too. Like she was her own lady. And so I think for the last couple of decades of her life, she was really into square dancing. And so she would make people square dance. And you couldn't turn down an invitation. Also, she really didn't like alcohol. And so I think she allowed people one drink at cocktail hour. I think she started to loosen up a little bit more as she got older. Oh, I'm so excited that they do have a beautiful picture of this. So this is her breakfast room, featuring an 18th century Russian chandelier hanging from above the table set with silver pieces from the, I'm going to try this, Yusupov Byzantine service by Alexander Glutin. And so we haven't really talked about Russia all that much, but her husband, her third husband, was a diplomat to Russia during Stalin times. And so they were trying to get rid of everything that talked about monarchies or came from a time before Stalin. And so there's some controversy of how items were acquired, but I guess from Mrs. Post's perspective, she was trying to save and preserve them. And so when she was in Russia with her diplomat husband, they went on a major shopping spree and really cleaned out all the czar's goodies. And so they were buying Fabergé eggs and paintings in China. They really bought a lot of things. Her husband, Davies, donated them to his alma mater in Michigan, and a lot of Russian paintings are there. But I was confused when I got to Hillwood and there was so much Russian. I couldn't really understand it. But Mrs. Post loves a good value and a good deal. And so now I understand it a little bit more. Also, speaking of this breakfast room in the book American Empress, it was referenced that someone came to join her for a meal in the breakfast room. It was her favorite room. She spent a lot of time in it. And someone complimented her plates. And she said, oh, they're from Woolworths, just a drugstore, like a five and dime. And so things didn't have to be expensive to be considered beautiful and useful. For Mrs. Post, she understood the value of a dollar that was instilled in her by her father. And she built General Foods, which is kind of wild. So back in the day, they didn't have techniques to freeze food. And she was on her, big, beautiful boat, and someone baked, in the book, I think it says goose, but then on Wikipedia, it says turkey. Someone had had frozen poultry, and they served it to her, and she asked them where they got it from, and they told her it was frozen. And Birdseye had created a flash freezing mechanism. So before this, if you were to have frozen food, the way they would freeze it, was traditional and not flash frozen. And so things would develop water crystals and you could tell they were frozen. And so as soon as she identified Birdseye as the future of frozen foods, she immediately wanted General Foods to purchase them. I will say the second husband did not support her in wanting to purchase Birdseye, and it became one of the best purchases. And so I think that did create some tension between them. But things get complicated sometimes. Anyways, Marjorie Merriweather Post is absolutely fantastic. I really hope that you purchase these books or check them out from the library. Or I was telling Martin Montgomery, who films this with me, I had to take off my thrift book sticker. I buy a lot of books on thrift books. I really enjoy them. And also, I want to show you a little bit more about Ms. Post. And so before we wrap up, she was a big collector of jewelry. Hillwood has a lot of her beautiful jewels. I think she's donated a lot of them to the Smithsonian as well. But I mean, like, how wild is this lady? In 1925, she's wearing the emerald pendant in a musical review, but in an area hospital. Like, she liked to have fun. She loved to entertain. She loved people. Everything I, read about her, she was, as we all are, a complicated person. She was given a lot of resources, and she was generous, and she was always seemingly true to herself. She was a new type of American woman in a lot of ways. And so I hope that you've enjoyed learning about Marjorie Merriweather Post. As we wrap this up, I do have one more thing. I have like two more things no, I have three more things. So sorry. Thank you for hanging with me so far. We're going to talk about the three things. And so I almost forgot about this. She did have a dress designed by Ms. Ann Lowe, and I have another video talking about Ms. Ann Lowe. She was the secret seamstress to American royalty. And I think this paragraph really speaks to Marjorie and who and what she stood for. So Marjorie Post's relationship with another esteemed American designer from the 1950s was much more harmonious. She was complicated. In a 1966 interview for Ebony magazine, the designer Ann Lowe recalled running into Post at a Paris fashion show while on assignment for the African American publication of the New York Age. Lowe did not identify herself as a designer while on fashion journalism projects, but Post recognized her and, glad to see her, proudly announced, "This is Miss Lowe, the head of the American house of Ann Lowe." The anecdote dates back to the early 1950s when Lowe, a Black designer from Alabama, had an exclusive dossier of white clients. Lowe designed elaborate debutante and bridal wear featuring hand-sewn details such as blooming roses, intricate tucks, and other ornamentation. Post shared and appreciated Lowe's vision of feminine nostalgia in dresses. And so the fact that Ms. Post, you know, really uplifted Ms. Lowe and in that way was very special of that time, because Jackie Kennedy also had Ann Lowe create her wedding gown, and she wouldn't even disclose who it was because she was a Black woman. And so I just admire Ms. Post. She's a lot of fun. And so I hope you get the books. And then we're pulling in antiques and pieces of art for each episode that we do. And so I want to tell you about this piece. And so I bought this on a recent trip. I was at Artifacts in Greenville, South Carolina. And if you ever get a chance to visit, it's a very special, I think Marjorie Merriweather Post would have enjoyed shopping there. It's a different kind of antique store. It's a hodgepodge and a lot of fun. And so I spotted this, and it's really unusual, and I couldn't figure out what it was. So I asked. And back in, 1886, I read it before I got on because I wanted to get the date right. And I think it's 1886. There was a horrible earthquake in Charleston, South Carolina. It did, $60 million worth of damage. 60 people died. And they took the debris from the earthquake and they threw it into Charleston Harbor. And so they've dredged Charleston Harbor and brought out some of the artifacts and pieces, and this is one of them. And so this was probably on a building. It's definitely an antique from Charleston, and it was preserved in the Charleston Harbor. And then I got to bring it home to Virginia, and it's just I love it. I love the texture. I love the story, and so thank you, Artifacts. And then I wouldn't be a good promoter if I didn't talk about East Coast Expo's next show and what's behind me. And so our next show is East Coast Expo Antiques, Art and Design. If you go to www.eastcoastexpo.com, you can see whenever our new shows are coming up. If you're watching this after September of 2026, then this is no longer the theme, but this is our mood board for Candyland. And so our next expo will have, I don't know where we're going to land, at least 65 or 70 antique dealers, artists, artisans, conveying in Richmond, Virginia. And it's just a lot of fun. I think Marjorie Merriweather Post would have liked to have come to East Coast Expo and shopped, because I designed it after a French shopping experience at the Fla de Chateau. There's music, it's a party. There will be no mandatory square dancing. We do have wine and cocktails if you choose to partake. But it's just a lot of fun. And these are pieces of inspiration that have inspired me as we create the new event. It's been lovely spending time with you. We always encourage people at the World of Beauty and Magic to always look for the beauty and keep the magic in your heart. And I can't wait to see you again. Thanks for spending time with me today.